Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I'm so excited to have you all and to have this conversation. Thank you for sharing your Monday evening with us. It means so much. Lily, are we all good with slides and ready to get started?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's move on to the next slide. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. This is From Awareness to Action, Advocacy Skills for Health Professionals Committed to the Fight for Health Justice, with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. And here's our agenda for the evening. We have three incredible speakers who are all local champions for equity, and I am so honored that they are joining us today. That's April Sims, Representative Shaun Scott, and Libby Watson. And our goal today is to leave you all with an understanding of the power of organized labor and collective action to create change, a sense of the direction Washington is headed in when it comes to the fight for health and wealth equity, and finally, to support you in understanding the many ways that health professionals can be involved in advocacy work. And at the end, we'll close out by taking a quick action together. And so I'd love to offer a land and labor acknowledgement to ground us in reflection and in gratitude before we launch into our program today. I live and work in Seattle, Washington, and am a guest on the ancestral lands of the Duwamish and Suquamish people. You are welcome to put in the chat where you are joining from today and whose land you are on as well. As a guest on these lands, I celebrate the rich history and the ongoing achievement of all Coast Salish peoples who are here and thriving in the Pacific Northwest. As a civil servant, I commit myself to honoring tribal sovereignty, to learning the history of Washington's treaty violations, and to the ongoing project of reconciliation. I'd also like to respectfully acknowledge my debt to those whose labor, often exploited, thanklessly generated the wealth of our nation and built the places where I live, work, and play. This is primarily the labor of enslaved people, as well as voluntary and involuntary immigrants. I share these acknowledgements in addition to my commitment to action, to committing my own labor to addressing the systemic drivers of health inequities. And a colleague recently shared a line with me that's kind of been echoing throughout my head this week and as we start this session, which is that the theft of labor is the theft of generational progress. And as we go through our program tonight, I invite you to get curious about how we can move beyond an awareness of these injustices and toward action that creates the world we all want to live in. I believe this awareness is essential for us to move collectively from a place of rooted understanding and of shared values, and will make us more effective in taking action with both care and accountability. Thank you so much. And so my name is Nicole Casanova. My pronouns are she, her, and I've been involved with WPSR's Economic Inequity and Health Task Force for almost 3 years. WPSR, Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, is a 40-year-old health professional-led advocacy organization, and we work to create a healthy, just, peaceful, and sustainable world. WPSR leverages the credible and trusted voice of healthcare professionals to educate the public, to influence decision makers, and to promote public policies that support our mission. And despite the word physicians in the title, WPSR is made up of folks from all sorts of health-related disciplines, including public health practitioners like me. And although we are an org of health professionals, we actually rarely focus on healthcare, and that's with good reason, as you will find out later. And instead, we primarily focus on upstream determinants of health. And next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm part of our Economic Inequity and Health Task Force, and our task force's mission is to see a world where all Washingtonians have enough money, all Washingtonians are housed, and structural racism no longer creates health inequities. And we do that in 3 ways. We take action to provide a consistent health perspective to pass social justice policies that improve health. We build our community and change social narratives about the root causes of inequities. And we deepen our understanding of economic and racial equity, health justice, and advocacy strategies. And so now that you know a little bit more about WPSR and what we do in our task force, I would love to hand it over to Anya to introduce our first speaker.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you everybody for joining.
I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, April Sims. April Sims was elected president of the Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO, in October 2022. She is the first woman elected WSLC president and the first Black woman elected to the presidency of any AFL-CIO state federation. As president, Sims leads Washington's largest union organization and the third most union dense state in the country, representing more than 500,000 union members. Sims' lived experience is evidence of the power and potential of organized labor. The granddaughter of Louisiana sharecroppers and the daughter of a single mother, Sims has seen the power of unions to change lives. The Great Migration brought Sims' grandfather to Washington, where his union job provided economic dignity for his family. Her mom's union job pulled their family out of the cycle of poverty. As a young mother, it was Sims' union job that allowed her to build economic security and activated her as a leader in Washington's labor movement. So, with that, I would love to hand it over to you, April.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. First, let me just want to flag that I'm at the airport, and so there might be a little bit of background noise. So I appreciate your grace at the very beginning. What an honor to be with you all again. I was grateful for the chance to join your task force. I think a few years ago, 2 years ago now, and I'm grateful to be back with you today. It's really powerful to gather with health professionals who see clearly that health justice and economic justice are inseparable. So I want to thank the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility Leadership for inviting me to be a part of tonight's conversation. Thank you for grounding us in that powerful land acknowledgement. As mentioned, my name is April Sims. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the privilege of leading the largest labor organization in the third most union dense state in the nation. At the Washington State Labor Council, we represent over 600 locals and affiliates that represent the interests of over 600,000 unionized workers in every industry, sector, and corner of this beautiful state. And we know that when we talk about health, we can't separate it from the conditions people live and work in. We know that poverty is a public health issue. Wages are a public health issue. Safe workplaces are a public health issue. And economic justice and health justice are bound together, and organizing is the way that we win both. Organizing is people coming together, it's identifying the struggles we share and building collective power to change the conditions that harm us. It's how we achieve and have achieved every historic win in this country. When I think about the 8-hour workday, I'm reminded that that wasn't a gift from employers. As long as we've had it, it was workers striking. It was workers holding the picket line, and it was workers and communities standing together until their demands could not be ignored. When I think about the civil rights movement and the end of Jim Crow, I know that that didn't come from the kindness of politicians. It came from mass protests, from grassroots organizing, and the bravery of ordinary people taking extraordinary risks. Here in Washington, when we passed progressive taxation reforms, so the wealthiest finally paid more of their fair share, that didn't happen because the wealthy volunteered it. It happened because unions, advocates, and community groups organized for years, knocked doors, showed up at hearings, and refused to accept a status quo that forced working families to carry the burden alone. And so the lesson is clear that lasting change comes when organized people confront organized money and win. So let's take a look at where we are today. Inequality continues to widen. Families are being priced out of housing. Healthcare is harder to access and harder to afford. These conditions existed before our current administration, and it has only gotten worse. Workplaces, from warehouses to hospitals, are stretched to their breaking point. And yet, in this moment, there is still hope. We are seeing more strikes than we've seen in decades, and workers are winning strong contracts in Washington and all over the country. And these are contracts that address more than just wages, benefits, and working conditions. These are contracts that address the issue of the whole worker and the issues that keep families whole. We're seeing young workers organizing at Starbucks and Amazon and in hospitals all across the country. We're seeing communities come together for immigrant rights, housing security, climate justice, health equity, and economic dignity. We're seeing folks come together to stand up for dignities and freedoms. And we know that unions are at the heart of this. We aren't just about good wages and strong contracts, although those are vital, but we're about building a more just society. The Constitution of the Washington State Labor Council charges us, and I quote, with fighting the forces that seek to undermine the democratic institutions of our nation and to enslave the human soul. This is language that has existed in the Constitution of the Washington State Labor Council since our founding more than 75 years ago. And when we fight for fair wages, for safe staffing levels, and paid sick days, we're also fighting for public health, for racial justice, and a stronger democracy. So the question is, what lessons can advocates for health justice like all of you take from the lessons we have from labor organizing? So first, I'll share with you that base building matters. That big rallies make headlines, that's true, but the quiet work of listening, of having one-on-one conversations, of building trust and belonging, that's what builds long-term power. That's how we engage more people in the fight of this moment. Second, we need multiple strategies. I mean, protests are powerful, but so is public testimony, so is bargaining, so is legal action and the electoral work. Change doesn't come from just one tactic. It comes from persistence across many fronts. And in this moment, we have to keep engaging in all of these strategies because you never know what might be the thing that sparks the next big movement. I mean, I think about 15-year-old Claudette Colvin, who was arrested for not moving to the back of the bus 9 months before Rosa Parks' arrest. And it was her arrest that sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, which became a pivotal strategy in the fight against segregation. So we have to keep engaging in multiple strategies to find that thing that's going to spark this revolution. Third, and I think most importantly, we have to center those most affected. We have a saying in the labor movement that those closest to the problem have to be closest to the solution. The people who live the deepest inequities have the sharpest understanding of what justice requires. And when they lead, when we use our institutionally recognized power to give voice to their experiences and to their solutions, we know that we come away with solutions that are more just, more durable, and more transformative for everyone. And I know the title of this event is From Awareness to Action, and that's exactly the shift we need. Awareness of injustice is not enough. Action, collective, sustained, strategic action is how we win. And I want to say to all of you tonight that as health professionals, you're already trusted voices in our communities. You already see how every day economic injustice shows up in people's bodies, in their access to care, in their life expectancy. That gives you both moral authority and organizing power. So you don't have to wait for permission to act. You don't have to wait for someone else to lead. You can use your positions, your voices, and your networks to be organizers for justice. In this moment, when the rules as we understand them are being rewritten or dismantled, when we come together and acknowledge that we're at a crossroads, we have to ask ourselves, will we accept an economy and a healthcare system that leaves so many others behind? Or will we organize together to build one future that's rooted in dignity, fairness, and justice? Now, the labor movement has a saying some of you might be familiar with: an injury to one is an injury to all, and that we are indeed each other's keeper. And that's not just a slogan. It's a truth about our health and our humanity. Our well-being is bound together. When we fight for economic justice, we are fighting for health justice. And when we win, all of us are healthier. So I want to thank you all for your leadership. I want to thank you for moving us from awareness to action. I want to thank you for everything you do every day to build a world that is healthier, more just, and more humane for all of us. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you so much, April. That was beautiful. And there's one line that I wrote down that I know I'll be repeating to myself, I think, over the coming months and years, which is that collective, sustained, and strategic action is how we win. And as you shared, it's how people have always won. And I am just so thrilled to have you and to share this message. Next, I know that we have gotten a really powerful introduction to those connections between health and wealth. And now that we've learned about the origins of organizing and that we have a long history of success and progress made through collective action, I'm going to help us dig a little bit deeper into the problem that our task force is most committed to addressing, which is health and wealth inequity. And Lily, could we pull the slides back up?
Wait, quickly, let's see if there's questions for
Sure.
April before we move on to the next portion.
Right.
So feel free, folks, to drop questions either into the chat or into the Q&A. I'm not seeing any at the moment, but I want to give a moment. Oh, I do see a question from Stephen. Anya, I'll pass it over to you to work on some Q&A.
Thanks, Lily, and thank you for the question, Stephen. Okay, the question for you, April, is given that the US is increasingly a fascist totalitarian state where relying on the Constitution or the rule of law no longer works, what strategies do you think we should focus on?
Yeah, great question. I think it is a lot of what we're doing right now, bringing folks together to deepen our understanding and our connection with each other, building community. And I also think a core strategy has to be joy and love, because the current administration has weaponized fear and pain. And the only solution to that, and hate, actually, weaponized hate, the only solution to that or the counter to that really is unity and community and love and joy. And even finding ways to be joyful and small acts of resistance can make a difference. I think it's important that we don't allow ourselves to be overwhelmed with fear and overwhelmed with uncertainty, and that we do work to build community and the kind of community that helps us as we navigate these moments.
Thanks so much for answering that, April. I'm checking the chat for any other questions. Folks, please feel free to share them. You're getting a lot of thank yous and praise in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions right now. Oh, okay, just got one. Do you think that an organized nationwide strike of labor and non-labor organized workers could be effective in moving this executive towards changing policies?
I do. I mean, I think withholding labor is always an effective tactic. I do think that that sort of mass nationwide coordinated um, economic disruption will take some time. And I think it's going to take a lot of educating folks and making sure that folks are ready for that kind of system action. But absolutely. But I think other types of economic disruption can be effective as well. You know, I mentioned the Murray Boss boycott. I think there are actions that we could take leading up to an even larger and broader scale national strike that would build momentum for something like that, and also help us secure some wins along the way, for sure. I dropped my phone, so excuse me.
Okay, thank you so much, April. If folks have any questions that come up for them that you would still like to ask April, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A so that we can try and get those answered. But with that, I think I will go ahead and hand it back over to Nicole as we kind of dive into that health and wealth connection. So, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Anya. And thank you so much, April. It has been such a joy to have you. And as Anya said, now we're going to dive a little more into the problem that our task force is most concerned with, which is the relationship between health and wealth. Because I know a lot of times folks come into these spaces wondering why we choose to improve health by focusing on economic issues. And so we're going to set that stage for why that is. And so the problem at a national level really is that despite spending so much money, so much more money on healthcare than the rest of the world combined, Americans die earlier and experience more illness than our counterparts in other wealthy nations, and even more than other nations that are far less wealthy than the United States. And so we really see economic inequity as a public health crisis. And so what is causing this crisis? There's a widely held perception that health is a matter of our individual choices, that we can buy more healthcare, that we can buy organic groceries and eat well, that we can exercise and we'll be good. You may have heard that message that an apple a day will keep the doctor away, implying again that our health is 100% in our hands. And the reality is more complicated. While yes, our individual health behaviors absolutely do play a role, research shows that it's only to the tune of about 30% of what determines a person's health. So diet, exercise, even substance use and behaviors like smoking don't even tell half of the story when it comes to health determinants. Meanwhile, 40% of an individual's health is determined by socioeconomic factors like education, occupation, and income. And so who's got access to things like education, good jobs with benefits and sick leave, livable wages, reliable public transit, and all of the resources we depend on is all determined by policies that are put in place on our behalf. And another 10% of our health is determined by the physical environment, which includes things like our housing conditions and our pollution exposure, which again are determined by regulations shaped by politics and policy. So economic policies, including and especially tax policy, have the power to improve or worsen economic inequality, depending on how they're set up. And historically, through policies like redlining and others that were set up to build wealth among white families at the expense of communities of color, our state and our nation have set up societies that are deeply unequal and are paying the price with their health. And this phenomenon isn't just true in Washington. We're kind of zooming out here to look at the US as a whole. This graph shows the extent of a country's health, social, and environmental problems on the vertical axis. And then on the horizontal axis, we see the extent of a country's income inequality. And so plotted on the graph, we see a number of peer nations. And on one end, down in the left, we see Norway with low income inequality and also low health and social problems. Along the middle, we see other European countries, plus Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, all kind of mixed throughout. And then way, way up in the top right corner, we have the United States with extraordinarily high income inequality correlated with the slew of health problems you see outlined on the right, which are super disturbing. And, I'll call out just the first one, which is that an infant is 70% more likely to die in the US than in other wealthy countries. And in fact, according to the 2025 Human Development Report, the US ranks 42nd in the world in terms of life expectancy, again, despite paying as more than any other nation on healthcare in this country. And so the relationship between health and wealth inequality is clear and is true at the neighborhood level as well as on the national level. In fact, a person's zip code is one of the strongest predictors of their lifespan. So for folks who live in Seattle and are more familiar with the neighborhoods here, we could plot out neighborhoods on this graph in a similar way too. And data shows that residents of, for example, Mercer Island live about 7 to 13 years longer than folks in South King County. So this sort of health-wealth connection replicates itself in our neighborhoods as well as among a nation as a whole. So the villain in our story is inequality, and that inequality was put in place through intentional policy decisions, but it also means it can be undone through intentional policy decisions. Our task force talks a lot about progressive taxes as a way to decrease inequality. And what we mean by that is lessening taxes for people struggling to make ends meet, eliminating tax breaks that only benefit the very wealthy, and producing more of the resources that contribute to more equal societies with better health outcomes. For decades, our state has had the most regressive tax code in the country, but last year we actually moved up a spot to the second most regressive, which might not sound like a lot, but was a major milestone thanks to years of collaborative advocacy, including the work of our task force and our guest speakers today. But we still have a lot of work to do to see the change that we want, which is where our next speaker will come in to tell us a little bit about the wins that we've had and the work that's still to come. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anya to introduce our next speaker.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. That really helped us, or at least myself, to understand really why our task force in terms of economic inequity and health, why we really focus on policy and those structural factors in addressing health and trying to improve health for those in our communities. Now I would love to pass it over to State Representative Shaun Scott of the 43rd Legislative District. He represents central Seattle neighborhoods, including Capitol Hill, downtown Seattle, South Lake Union, East Lake, Wallingford, Fremont, University District, and more in the Washington State House of Representatives. A filmmaker, author, and labor organizer with a focus on progressive taxation, labor rights, housing, and economic justice, as well as anti-poverty strategies, he helped pass Washington's Working Families Tax Credit, capital gains tax, and a basic income pilot. In office since January 2025, Rep. Scott serves as Vice Chair for the Labor and Workplace Standards Committee and on the Finance and Education Committees. Rep. Scott has been active in Seattle's Democratic Socialists of America since 2017 and is the first socialist elected to the Washington State Legislature in over a century. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Representative Scott. Thank you for being here.
Awesome, Anya. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation to speak alongside so many eloquent panelists. Libby, April, always good to be in your company as well. Anya had mentioned that I'm the first socialist who has served in the Washington State Legislature in over a century. That is the first to open one. I'm certainly not the first accused socialist to serve in the Washington State Legislature. This was a year where the state legislature made great gains in passing a number of progressive revenue packages that definitely animated the same kinds of conservative right-wing reaction that we have seen be very active federally. And of course, in any other year, raising something like $8 to $9 billion worth of new revenue would be, I think, cause for celebration for our state, for our communities, especially for people who understand that it is state revenue that funds programs like childcare, higher education, affordable housing. The unfortunate economic reality was that that revenue was passed in the context of a $16 billion, B as in Bill Gates, $1 billion shortfall that made it so that a number of very, very drastic cuts were made to important programs that people in my district and my community, and I know across the state, care a lot about. Reductions to public employee pensions, reductions to reproductive health care in Washington state, reductions, cost reductions, spending reductions to higher education and more. And so I think that one thing that I have learned as the representative from the 43rd Legislative District is that my district has historically played a very, very important role in setting the pace for what it means to be progressive not only as individual lawmakers, but as a state generally. And constant reminder that we need to be doing better in the state legislature by people in our state. I was proud to work this year on one of the revenue bills that I believe is instructive in this conversation that we were having about turning our day-to-day activism into real other kinds of action, however we choose to engage. House Bill 1858 was a bill that I was proud to work on this year, which eliminated a fee loophole in the document recording fee that made big banks have to pay that fee. It created somewhere between $60 and $70 million of new revenue, half of that to low-income housing in our state, the other half to the Covenant Home Ownership Program, which is a program that my predecessor in the 43rd LD started for home buyers assistance for Black and brown home buyers. And our tax code in Washington state is littered with these sorts of fee loopholes, tax loopholes of the sort that, we're really seeing a lot of revenue that could be devoted towards programs that we all use and all care about. And the money is just oftentimes not there because of these loopholes that have been extended to major corporations that, trust me, don't need the handout. I would ask us to sort of imagine a pyramid, if you will, which is in some ways represents our state tax code. At the bottom level of that pyramid, I think you have fee loopholes and tax breaks of the sort that I've just described. Somewhere in the middle, you have programs like B&O tax raise, which I was happy to say did happen this year and came out of the Finance Committee. Taxes on large financial institutions, on large corporations. Somewhere at the top of that pyramid, you would have something like the wealth tax or an income tax, which are significantly greater political lifts than some of the things at the bottom of that pyramid. But that nonetheless would represent a real watershed in our state's tax policy and our history. As somebody who serves as a representative who serves on the House Finance Committee, I tend to focus a lot more on the bottom and the middle parts of that pyramid because I think that that is where we have some of our most attainable, actionable tax policy ideas. Right now, for instance, we are giving away a huge tax break to major corporations for operating data centers in Washington state. Some of these are connected to artificial intelligence. It is something in the order of over $100 million a year annually that we are giving to large corporations, Microsoft in specific, to operate data centers on the inspiration that they will provide certain jobs for members of our community, which a recent study indicated did not necessarily materialize. Other tax breaks that we give to huge petroleum firms in Washington state. And so I really do believe that there's so much more that we could be doing just by saying we are no longer going to extend the tax breaks that we have given to major corporations. In other words, that would not even require new legislation. That would simply be an act of state lawmakers saying to big corporations, you have to pay the same taxes that mom and pop businesses do. In the case of the document recording fee, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, you have to pay the same document recording fee that everyday people have to pay when they purchase or get rid of a house. In the middle of that pyramid, there was some action that was taken this year that we should be happy about. I touched a little bit before on the business and occupation, the raise in the business and occupation tax in Washington state, which was one of the larger revenue packages that we saw. I was disappointed that the House of Representatives, we did not take action on passing a wealth tax this year. A bill was sent to us on the very last day of session by the Washington State Senate. I would have liked to have seen us take an action on passing that tax, which would be a tax on people who, on large in financial intangible stocks, bonds, things of that sort. And so I will hope that in this upcoming legislative session that we will do something about getting that that bill out of our chamber. Make no mistake, the stakes for not taking action on passing something like that means that there would be continued cost reductions of the kinds that I think most people would find quite distasteful and actually very, very harmful in our state. At the very, very top of this pyramid, it's an idea that you hear people talk a lot about, is the income tax in Washington state. I am a strong proponent of it. You know, in the same electoral cycle that Washington state pledged its delegates to send Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the White House in the November 1932 election cycle, Washington voters in that same election cycle 90 years ago did approve an income tax, which was stricken down 9 or 10 months later by the state Supreme Court. Since that time, it was touched on a little bit earlier, Washington, as a result of an over-reliance on sales and property taxes, has the dubious distinction of being one of the most regressive states with respect to taxes. All that means is that people who are poor pay more as a portion of their income. People who have more actually pay a lot less. And what that means is that programs that all of us on this call I know care a lot about, from public health on over to public transit, go defunded and underfunded. Public schools have less money as a result of the state legislatures and the governor's office unwillingness to pursue progressive revenue. People get worse educations. College is harder to get into. People have to work longer and harder hours for lower pay with less help from the state. And we have to do something about it. I believe that that is part of the reason why voters in the 43rd legislative district have been as vocal as they have been about the need to see revenue passed. And it's also the case that Washington state can never really be the kind of state that stands up to what we are seeing from the federal administration if we are upholding austerity politics right here at home in the face of federal authoritarianism. When this year, Washington state government made cuts to public pensions and to reproductive health care, and made college less accessible and less affordable for thousands of Washingtonians. When Washington state went down the direction of a dramatic reduction in spending on reproductive health care, we did all of those things without the without a federal directive to do so. In other words, that was Washington state acting on its own volition as a result of its own spending decisions, as a result of its own unwillingness to tax the ultra wealthy. Only now that session has ended are we seeing what the full impact of those decisions are going to be, because the Trump administration's reconciliation budget has made further cuts and further cost reductions. But make no mistake about it, Washington state was a pioneer in austerity this year, and we didn't need the help. State government did not need the help of Washington, D.C. to go down that track. And we are going to have to find a way to get out of that that austerity mindset that I think that too many in state government are beholden to at this point. So I want to open it up. I know there are folks who have some questions as well, but that's where I think a lot of members of the community here in the 43rd legislative district see the current budgetary situation, which is that they can't understand why it is in a state that has as much wealth as Washington state that we are making cost reductions of the sort that state legislatures in much more retrograde, less progressive places would be making.
Thank you so much, Representative Scott. I'll keep an eye out for questions as they come through.
I think we have a couple in the chat.
Okay, in the chat. Okay. Stephen said, firstly, congratulations on coming out as a socialist. And secondly, what were important steps in that process for you? What would it take to not have to wait another 100 years? Many students, much younger than me, will raise their hands when asked if they are socialists. What would it take to get older folks to cast off their fears emanating from the Soviet era and consider socialism?
It's a very good question. So I have been an out socialist for practically my entire adult life. A lot of that has to do with familial influences. Both of my parents grew up in a democratic socialist country in Jamaica, and they were both members of unions. It's how they actually met as unionized nurses in New York City. And when you you asked the question about what would it take for older folks to sort of cast off some of the fears that they might have about socialism as a set of ideas. I would point people in the direction of what it is that the capitalist economic system has done for them and for people who they care about. We, saw some very, very poignant statistics in the earlier part of this presentation around wealth inequality and how that leads directly to diminished life expectancy for many members of our community. I would look on the other side of it and say that medical tourism is a thing where people in the United States, when they get ill, oftentimes at the top of their list of countries to go visit are former Soviet bloc countries and current socialist countries that have had a radical commitment to public health. Vietnam, Cuba, where there is, nearly a 100% adult literacy rate, a place that has invested so much in public education or public health that you have many doctors and healthcare professionals that are setting the pace and travel elsewhere to gift the knowledge that they have attained to help people become well and help people not be as sick. So I think that people have to just get really, really clear-eyed about whether or not they feel that an economic system where 10 or 15 individuals have as much wealth as 30% of the entire country is a fair system that's working for anybody other than those 10 or 15 people. And I think that it's going to take a lot of people standing up and saying, I choose to identify as a socialist, and I identify as one because I agree with the ideas. There are many people who are progressives that have come to many of the same conclusions. But I think it's going to take a lot of activism and a lot of people fighting and getting involved electorally, which I really appreciate April Sims for calling attention to earlier. It's really going to take a sort of an all of the above approach for us between electoralism, activism, speaking out, testimony, etc.
Great. Thank you for answering that. We got some more questions flowing in. The next one, will an income tax generate more revenue than a wealth tax?
This is a very, very good question, and I'm glad that it's being asked. I would have to go refer to there are various sort of dials and variables in any of the bills that get passed in the House of Representatives that could mean that a wealth tax would actually bring in more than an income tax. Make no mistake about it, an income tax is at present not legal. A wealth tax is. A wealth tax could actually be passed next year. An income tax is something that would require much more of a political lift. So I am of the opinion that we really should be doing what we can do legally in the short term while we are still building that coalition for an income tax, which I agree that we should have. And one thing that we want to be aware of is not falling for any bait and switch. There has been recent talk from a lot of major corporations who have caught wind of the fact that a wealth tax is very likely to pass in the next several years. And so what they're saying is, well, we should be doing an income tax instead. And part of that is because they know that an income tax is going to take a lot longer to pass, and there are no guarantees in the way that there would be for a wealth tax, which is perfectly legal. So we want to make sure that we keep our eye on the ball, do what we actually can legally, and not leave it up to major corporations which have fought taxes, progressive taxes of all kinds, to suddenly, out of the goodness of their hearts, come to the conclusion that an income tax would be a good thing. I think that the rug would get pulled out from under that effort in the long term. But in the medium and the short term, there's a lot that we can be doing to make sure people have roofs over their heads, access to quality education, schools that can stay open, and healthcare through closing corporate tax loopholes, and also through the wealth taxes we were talking about earlier.
Thank you. And then we just had a question that's pretty closely related to that, which is, do you think that the Washington Supreme Court would be amenable to an income tax right now?
I think it's very plausible, and there are a number of revenue streams that the state of Washington could be pursuing right now that would raise as much in the aggregate as an income tax would, that would not require a court appeal, that would certainly be less of a political lift, and that would be legal now. So I think that a Supreme Court decision, the feeling in Olympia right now is that the Supreme Court at present is a lot more amenable to the idea of an income tax than the Supreme Court that struck down the income tax 90 years ago. And so that's fair and well. We have to keep building that coalition, and those ideas need to stay alive. It's also the case that we don't want to gloss over what it is that we can actually do in the present to fund programs that we all depend on in our state.
Thank you. I did miss a question a bit earlier. Thank you, Dana. The question was, what Rosa Parks moment will spark the conversation amongst our corporately sponsored legislators to finally support M for All?
Well, briefly, it's a very, very good question. I have to be perfectly honest. I'm not terribly optimistic about elected officials coming to the conclusion that Medicare for all is going to be something that they should pursue. I am very optimistic that there are going to be everyday people that are going to be taking action that will force elected officials, some of whom receive huge corporate subsidies from big pharma, many of whom actually serve in the Washington state legislature. So I think that everybody who is in the Washington State House of Representatives is familiar with people getting sick, passing away, having very diminished quality of life as a result of getting sick and getting ill. And that alone up to this point has not been enough of a spur to action for Medicare for all in our state. That's just the unfortunate reality of it, and it's the truth. So as little confidence as I have in elected officials as a whole taking action on this question on their own volition, I am very, very optimistic that when people continue to push the envelope, including in ways that are not currently construed as legal, through mass action and other very radical actions that are going to force the conversation in ways that often make people very, very uncomfortable. I believe that that's going to be the thing that gets it done. We did briefly have a period of time last year where, there were healthcare CEOs in this country that were physically afraid to show their faces in public as a result of, an extrajudicial event, let's call it that took place last year. And you really have to look around and say, how is it that we got to the position where people are taking the law and their circumstances into their own hands in such a way? And it's because of the extreme unaccountability of elected officials who thus far have not been very responsive to the idea of Medicare for all. So I think it's going to take a lot of pushing, and it's not always going to be pretty either.
Thank you. We'll do just one or two more questions, and then we will have to move on. But your talk made folks very curious. So the next question, what kinds of coalition building and focused work do you need from us to help you in your work? What are the top priorities for the coming year, and how can we best engage?
Absolutely. I mean, all of these are really, really excellent questions. Rachel, this question I would say comes down to how often people are willing to make the trip down to Olympia, whether or not people are willing to attend town halls that representatives and senators hold back in their districts during session, especially during a short session. Last year, because of the ruckus that was raised by public sector employees and other lefty organizations in the 43rd Legislative District, public furlough employees, which was a plan or a directive, if you will, of Governor Ferguson's, did not materialize, right? It was the governor's preference that we balance the budgets on the backs of working people in our state by furloughing public employees without pay. That was a detestable suggestion to many of our union siblings who showed up to a town hall, made a lot of noise, rankled a lot of cages, and made it really, really clear to lawmakers that that was going to be an unacceptable policy pursuit. I think that it's going to have to be a similar kind of effort. With my individual office and the capacity that I have as a representative who, just got done with my freshman year, have already identified a couple of bills, and I'm working on those that I think are going to help us address the climate crisis and where they intersect with wealth inequality. In specific, the fact that $60 million was cut from the Washington State Forest Mitigation Fund last year. I would like to identify a funding source that could help to recuperate some of those funds. Another bill that I would like to advance this session, which would raise the cap that tech companies pay into the Workforce Education Act, which makes college not affordable but free for thousands of low-income Washingtonians. Raising that cap would actually mean that more people can go to college for free. So those are a couple of the bills that I have on my docket. And I think that, once again, it's going to really take, I think, a lot of concerted effort and people showing up to town halls and to Olympia to let other legislators know that these are things that we want to see happen.
Great, thank you so much. There are a few other questions for you that are in the Q&A, if you wouldn't mind maybe typing your responses to them, but we need to move on to our next panelist. But I just want to thank you so much for being here and for sharing that presentation. I think it's really helpful to have a lawmaker come and talk to us. And, you know, April spoke a lot to the collective, which really stuck with me. And I think that you really helped us kind of peel back a really low barrier way to engage in collective advocacy in terms of engaging in our local policy and our state policy and really fighting for potential laws and bills that are going to improve our health and address the structural racism and inequities that we face. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for all of the questions. I'm going to move us along to our last speaker tonight, who is Libby Watson. Libby is a campaign manager and organizer with more than 7 years of campaign experience, including a congressional race in Northeast Ohio and statewide field director for Washington State Democrats, where she was influential in reelecting every Democratic incumbent in addition to flipping 2 legislative seats and the 3rd congressional district. She most recently served as the campaign manager for the No on 2124 campaign to protect Washington's first in the nation long-term care program. So with that, Libby, if you are ready, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so very much. I am ready. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction. It really is an honor. I kind of feel like Lil Me gets to present alongside April Sims and Representative Scott, which means a lot to me. So I'm really happy to be here and to talk about something that I care so much. Sorry if my lighting is kind of weird. My apartment is very hot, as I'm sure many of you are also experiencing. So it is dark and just my face is lit. But my name is Libby Watson. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently working on both the Approve 8201 campaign, which will improve the Washington Long-Term Care Fund. And I'm also serving as campaign manager with Washington Families for Freedom, which is focused on protecting students and trans youth. And I'm going to talk about both of those a little later and how you can use your voices there. But I wear a lot of hats. I've worn a lot of hats. Most of my professional background is in field and organizing, which I love because I love getting to work with people and hear their stories and learn what gets them excited about showing up. And it's wonderful to see that so many people have shown up to something like this on a lovely Monday evening. I've had the pleasure of working with WPSR for several years now through my work to advance progressive revenue with Invest in Washington Now and with the legislative and electoral fights for the Washington Cares program, which Dr. Charles Mayer, who I assume you all know here, was particularly influential in, and we really couldn't have had such successful campaigns without. I want to thank all of you for doing what you do as health professionals and by reassuring you that your voices and advocacy are powerful. We always say that, to be honest, when trying to plug advocacy and get volunteers. However, of all the campaigns I have been on over the years and the countless rounds of polling we've conducted and that I've seen and read, people like doctors, nurses, and caregivers very consistently test as one of the most trusted messengers. That means that even a relatively small act of advocacy, like submitting a letter to the editor in your local paper or letting us use your name and professional title with a strong quote on our website, goes a long way. And I really do mean that compared to a lot of other respected people and really great messengers. What you all do and what you bring and how much society has learned to trust you and looks to you as a community leader is special. There will always be year-round ways to advocate for health justice and any issue that you're passionate about, but there is an obvious demand for those efforts during the state's legislative session, which of course we just heard a lot about, and during campaign season, which you could argue is sort of the whole half of the year, but definitely picks up when we go into the primaries, which happened earlier this month, and then again when we go into the general election. It's been a particularly busy couple of years for both progressive revenue and healthcare policy in Washington, which I've had the honor of being part of. And we would not have had the successes that we did without people like you and voices from communities all around the state. I want to start by sharing a few wins from Invest in Washington Now's organizing during this past legislative session. IWN is so far from alone in this movement. There are really countless other entities, nonprofits, and coalitions who work hard to get the word out and get people involved. But as an organizer myself, with IWN during session, we accomplished having almost 70,000 emails sent to lawmakers and the governor, including almost 3,500 personalized emails. And the difference there is that, as I'm sure you've seen, because you're all obviously activists and you're paying attention, a lot of organizations like IWN create really simple ways for anyone and everyone to take action by clicking a few buttons. So there's those online action pages where you just put in your name and your address and your email, and you click that last button to send it off with sort of boilerplate messaging that we know is effective and we know those numbers matter. But they're not really getting to see any of your, your passion and why you're sending it. And so one of the huge differences that we have as sort of a movement between us and our opposition when it comes to progressive revenue is all those personal stories. And this past ledge session, the majority of their voices, our opposition's voices, were huge corporations like Amazon and powerful business lobbyists. Whereas our voices were people like you, public school teachers, parents of kids with disabilities, caregivers to patients relying on Medicaid, and young people who care about the state's future. And as you just saw, because Shaun spoke, state lawmakers are very much real people who care about their constituents in a real way beyond just getting reelected. And they want to know how these bills will impact you. So telling your personal story, not just when it comes to legislative session, but anytime you have a chance to advocate, inserting whatever you can that makes you passionate and what will, what might harm you or help you and your family and your community. Those words really do make a bigger impact. IWN also succeeded in recruiting over 60 activists willing to testify in support of the progressive revenue bills, even with the last minute nature of some of those hearings. And not all of that was live or in person, but folks also submitted written testimony, which is a great way to take action as well. And folks who testified came from all over the state, from Olympia to Vancouver, Bellingham to Fruitland, Renton, and beyond, which is really key because Seattle has a sort of a reputation for obvious reasons that it is the metropolitan hub in our state, and a lot of organizations are based in the Puget Sound area, but voices from all over the state matter so much, especially because issues like progressive revenue are going to impact people in rural communities and other parts of the state differently than how it might affect people in just Seattle. We also generated more than 5,000 pro sign-ins across the 5 bills, and we had multiple in-person events, including rallies at the Capitol and small days of action all around the state that had anywhere from 8 to over 200 people show up, and all those drops in the bucket add up. Rep Scott obviously just talked about this, but all of this activism led to lawmakers avoiding $9.4 billion in cuts to education, healthcare, housing, and other services by raising revenue from a range of sources, including expanding the capital gains tax, closing tax loopholes, and adding a very small business tax on big corporations. However, again, like Rep Scott said, we still have a very significant budget gap over the next 4 years. I've never heard someone say billion as in Bill Gates, but that was great. I'm going to use it. So it's a $5 billion budget gap that we are facing because those big corporations, our opposition, were able to block a wealth tax and a payroll tax that would have made a really substantial difference in that budget gap. That means, though, good news for us is that there's work left to do to achieve a more equitable Washington. So your sustained commitment is critical, like April mentioned earlier. This isn't a short-term thing that we need you for. We need the sustained energy and advocacy if we really want to see equity. Another sort of complication, what we don't know about what's next is what special interests like Brian Haywood, pretty specifically Brian Haywood, and Let's Go Washington are going to try to accomplish. There's been a lot of chatter circulating about potential signature gathering for initiatives to the legislature that would essentially trigger a very similar year to what happened in 2024, where state lawmakers had to choose what to pass themselves versus what to send along to the ballot for voters to decide. Fortunately, Brian Haywood was pretty unsuccessful last general election and only got one of his initiatives to pass on the ballot. And we as the progressive community have a better understanding of what to expect and a more unified front now. And we created a coalition called Defend Washington to sort of act as the counterpoint to Let's Go Washington. And right now, we don't know exactly what issues are going to end up in front of voters when it comes to signing and then getting signatures later this year, which means we also don't know exactly what initiatives might get thrown at lawmakers come 2026 legislative session. So what's really important is staying up to date, staying in the know, being ready to act. One of the campaigns that was unsuccessful for Brian Haywood and his cronies was 2124, which, if it had passed, would have led to the destruction of our state's first in the nation long-term care program. WPSR was incredibly involved in this. And that campaign required very different kinds of organizing compared to what I just spoke about with Invest in Washington's work. We knew going into the No on 2124 campaign that it wasn't the kind of thing that was going to attract loads of volunteers who'd go door knocking to talk to voters about long-term care, especially given the other initiatives and candidate campaigns happening simultaneously. So what we really relied on when it came to advocacy was trusted messengers talking among their communities, doing things like writing letters to the editor and op-eds in large and small papers all around the state. We relied on expert spokespeople like Dr. Charles Mayer and Justin Gill, who is the president of the Washington State Nurse Association, and relying on them to do things like speak at public events, participate in the Strangers Endorsement Board interview, and letting us put their names and titles in our voter guide statement. And we could always use more of that because I'm sure Justin Gill and Dr. Mayer could tell you they were putting in a lot of energy and capacity into that campaign. And so if we had more hands on deck from similarly trusted messengers who could serve as expert spokespeople, it would go a long way in expanding our reach and maybe making Dr. Mayer less tired. I also really want to be clear when I say experts that you are one in your own way, even if you don't feel that way. And the vast majority of campaigns or nonprofits doing advocacy work year round are more than happy to provide you with talking points and help you use your personal stories and professional experiences to affect change. And that's exactly what we were able to do last year with the No on 21-24 campaign, with so much success by working with caregivers of patients receiving long-term care, people with pre-existing conditions, and women who volunteered their time because they knew that the private insurance industry charges them higher premiums, so they had more to lose if 21-24 were to pass. Looking forward, there are a lot of unknowns given the lack of progress on our opposition signature gathering. But one thing we know is coming up on our November ballots is 8201. And as this group likely knows better than most, Medicaid is the largest funder of long-term care. And it also just was cut devastatingly by our federal government, which is going to impact hundreds of thousands of Washingtonians in hospitals in Washington alone. So those cuts put more pressure on states, and that's why it is so important now than ever before that we protect and boost the long-term care program. And 8201 will make that funding more reliable and secure by changing the way that it is invested without costing taxpayers a dime. So the campaign is pretty scrappy, and anything you can do to help spread the word is appreciated. It's statewide, so no matter where you are, you'd be helping by talking to your friends, your neighbors, coworkers. And one of the simplest ways for us to advocate in this modern age is by reposting on social media. I know it can seem kind of trite or ineffective, but I'm sure you've noticed, even if maybe you're a special someone who doesn't do this a lot, but a lot of us spend way too much time on social media. So increasing that visibility makes a big difference, especially given Washington's strict laws around political advertisements on social media. Extending the reach organically is really easy and makes a difference that we can't pay for as campaigns. And because you as an individual are going to get that content in front of a different audience than I would, for example, if I'm reposting or say a high school student who's interested in the topic. If you're part of any other organizations, if it's like an LD group, legislative district group, or at really any kind of like local club, a Rotary Club, and they haven't endorsed the campaign yet, that's a great way to support it, if it aligns with you, of course. And you can connect decision makers with me, and we'd be happy to come present. Or even better, and a way you can help beyond endorsements is that we can prepare you to act as a campaign spokesperson to help educate the masses. There are also, of course, the tried and true campaign methods that many people are familiar with, even if they haven't taken part, like phone banking, text banking, and door knocking. Approve 8201 is unlikely to have the resources to run that kind of programming. But those opportunities are a great way to get involved in campaigns more broadly, especially if you're newer to volunteering. And I'm going to put, let's see, to everyone, I'm going to put the website in the chat for 8201 if you want to learn more and sign up to get involved. That really is a good way to take action. And that's from my unbiased opinion. It's a topic that is easy to be passionate about when it comes to how many folks need long-term care and the devastating cuts to Medicaid, the problems that will create, which is making our First in the Nation program even more important. Lastly, I want to talk briefly about Washington Families for Freedom, which I'm also currently working with. We are preparing for a potentially very difficult fight to protect trans youth and to protect the recently amended by state Democrats Parental Bill of Rights. Our opposition is using these issues as fear-mongering to drive Republican turnout, just like Republicans and extreme right-wing people are doing all around the country. Earlier this year, we thought that they were going to gather signatures to get these issues on this November's ballot. That did not happen. So now we are preparing for a Decline to Sign campaign where we will absolutely be looking for volunteers and advocates to spread the right messaging to protect these harmful initiatives from even making it to the legislature And this actually goes beyond WFF. There are a lot of other issue areas where our opposition are considering getting signatures for to send them to the legislature. So if that happens and lawmakers have to make a choice, we will also then need testifiers and activists around the state during ledge session. And if, yet again, one or many of these initiatives end up on our ballots in November of 2026, it will be all hands on deck to spread the word with a lot of the actions that I've mentioned already. So please start paying attention now. The one I am the most educated on is the Washington Families for Freedom campaign. So that's what I'm sharing. But there are definitely others. So one of the most dangerous things that we can do is to ignore what's going on and not educate ourselves. So I hope that you will check those out. When Lily asked me to speak here, she wanted me to share the wide variety of ways that people can advocate. And I hope I've made it obvious that there are so many ways that you can make a difference. And some of them can take literally a matter of minutes. Voting in all elections is critical, but advocacy and taking action goes so far beyond voting and reminding others to do the same. And everyone is able to do it regardless of your age or your citizenship status. One good thing that came out of the pandemic lockdown is the rise in virtual opportunities. So in many ways, it's easier now than ever to take action because we're so able to connect. And what's important is that you do something. So, you're here tonight and part of this amazing organization, and you're taking all the right steps to be strong advocates. So much of the work that I do and that Rep Scott does and April does intersects in ways that I realize more and more the longer I'm working in Washington politics. So if you ever don't know where to start, I really do welcome you to reach out to me and ask for a connection to the campaign or organization, whoever makes the most sense for the issue that you're passionate about. But thank you so much for hearing me out. I know we're short on time, so I can't take questions, but also happy to answer anything in writing down the line.
Thank you so much, Libby. It was great. I feel like you've definitely earned the title of a campaign expert, so it was really valuable to hear from you and to learn how us working in health really do or can play a valuable role in fighting for health and these big policies. So thank you so much. And yeah, since we are running a bit short on time, if you could please enter any questions into the Q&A or the chat, it would be much appreciated if you wouldn't mind answering those there, Libby. And with that, I would love to hand it over to Lily.
Yeah, so don't worry, we won't take too much more of your time, but we do like to end everything we do with some action because that's what we're here for. So just going to share my screen really quickly, and then we have one quick action and one quick chat prompt for you. So first, whoops. This is fine, actually. All right, so if you go to this website, you can take action here tonight, and I will drop this in the chat as well, so don't worry, you don't have to type it out from your screen. I'm really bad at talking and typing at the same time, and it's the same website you used to register for this event. We've just changed it to now be in action. So what this is a letter to lawmakers, and what it does is it urges our lawmakers to step up and fix Washington State's tax code, especially in the wake of HR 1 or the big bad, not at all beautiful bill that you likely have heard about that is cutting Medicaid, SNAP, and much more while giving billions in tax cuts to the wealthy. So this letter calls on our lawmakers here in Washington to protect our programs by creating a more just tax code where we can fund the programs we all depend upon for our health and well-being. And I also want to say, we also wanted to drop in the chat, now that we've heard all of these many ways to advocate, you all would share some ways you're interested in advocating. So 2 actions for you. And while you're doing those, I just want to end with saying thank you. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. We're so happy everyone said yes. It was so great hearing from you. I loved hearing all your different perspectives from your own different personal experiences. It was really fantastic. Appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you who joined us tonight to hear from these folks, to think about different ways you can take action. We will send a recording and some of these links and actions and follow up. And yeah, thank you all so much.